The morning light through the terminal windows had that pale, sterile quality that only exists in airports, bright enough to keep people awake, cold enough to keep them moving. Gate 14 was already busy. Roller bags clicked over tile seams. A boarding announcement echoed twice before anyone reacted to it. Inside the aircraft, first class looked like a magazine advertisement for a life most passengers would never fully have. Warm recessed lighting, folded blankets with a faint lavender press. A flight attendant named Denise moving down the aisle with a tray of pre-departure drinks, greeting people not by seat number but by name. Mr. Callahan, sparkling water again this morning. Mrs. Ockhaffer, we held the aisle seat for you just like you asked. It was smooth. It was rehearsed in the way that good service is rehearsed, not fake, just practiced until it looked effortless. The senior crew member, a woman named Patris, stood near the galley curtain reviewing the cabin manifest on a tablet, occasionally glancing up to make eye contact with boarding passengers, projecting the calm authority of someone who had done this 1,000 times and expected today to be the 1,001st. Overhead bins clicked shut one by one. A businessman in 2A was already asleep behind a folded eye mask before the safety card had even been placed in the seat pocket in front of him. In 1C, a woman scrolled through a spreadsheet with the practiced indifference of someone who had long ago stopped noticing what airplane she was on. The hum of the auxiliary power unit filled the cabin with a low, steady vibration, the kind of background noise passengers stop hearing within minutes, but that never quite disappears. Near the galley, a folded stack of hot towels waited under a warming cloth, timed to be handed out the moment the door closed. Denise checked her watch. Boarding was running 2 minutes ahead of schedule, which in her experience meant something would inevitably happen to erase that margin before departure. She just didn't expect it to happen this soon, and she didn't expect it to happen in row 3. Everything about the cabin said the same thing. This flight is under control. Then Julian Reid stepped through the aircraft door. He was unremarkable in the way that competent people often are. Mid-40s, dark gray overcoat folded over one arm, a leather bag slung across his shoulder, boarding pass held loosely between 2 fingers, not gripped, not checked twice. He didn't scan the cabin like a man looking for a fight. He scanned it the way an engineer looks at a bridge, not suspicious, just aware. He said good morning to the flight attendant near the door. He said it quietly and he meant it. His seat was 3A window, paid, confirmed weeks in advance. He walked down the aisle, found the row and stopped. A woman was already sitting in 3A. She had her earbuds in, a small monogrammed pillow already fluffed against the window, and a tablet open on the tray table showing a loyalty app with a gold tier badge glowing at the top of the screen. She didn't look up right away. When she did, it wasn't with surprise. It was with the faint, practiced patience of someone who has learned that waiting a few seconds usually makes problems disappear. "Excuse me," Julian said, calm and unhurried. "I think you're in my seat. This is 3A." She removed one earbud, not both. "I always sit in the window," she said. "It's in my profile preference." "I understand," Julian said, "but my boarding pass says 3A." He turned it slightly so she could see it without needing to lean forward and invade her space. No raised voice. No performance for the row behind them, just information offered plainly. She glanced at it for less than a second. "I'm sure it's fine," she said. "The airline usually sorts these things out. I'm in 4C on the ticket, but I always get moved. It's a whole thing with my status." "I don't need you to move for status reasons," Julian said. "I need my paid seat." It wasn't sharp, it wasn't cold, it was simply exact. He set his bag down in the aisle beside him, not blocking it, just resting it against his leg while he waited. He didn't lean over her. He didn't gesture toward the overhead bin as if to hurry her along. He simply stood, upright, patient, the boarding pass still held loosely at his side, the way a man holds a document he knows he won't need to raise his voice to defend. Behind him, a line of passengers had begun to form, not long yet, just 3 or 4 people, shifting their weight, glancing at watches, doing the quiet math that boarding delays always trigger in frequent flyers. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. The tension of a stalled aisle has its own language, communicated entirely through size and small adjustments of posture. The woman in 3A finally removed her second earbud, setting both of them delicately into a small charging case, as if the interruption deserved that much ceremony before she addressed it properly. "Look," she said, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a person who should already understand it. "I fly this airline every single week. My profile is flagged for window seating. This is genuinely not something I usually have to discuss." "I believe you," Julian said. "I'm not questioning your history with the airline. I'm telling you where I'm assigned." "It's one row," she said. "4C is the same cabin, same seat width, same meal, same everything. I don't understand why this is such an issue." "It's an issue," Julian said, "because it's not actually the same. One of us paid for a specific seat and is holding a ticket that confirms it. The other is holding a preference. Those aren't the same thing, even if the seats feel similar." That was when Denise arrived, tablet in hand, smile already assembled. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, in the tone flight attendants use when they already suspect the answer is no, but are hoping the question alone will fix it. "This gentleman says he's in 3A, the woman said before Julian could speak, "but I always sit in the window. Can we just work this out quickly? I don't want to hold up boarding." Denise looked at her tablet. The truth was right there. Julian could see it too. He wasn't trying to read her screen, but the angle of the tablet gave it away. Seat 3A, Reid J. confirmed paid ticketed. Seat 4C, Whitfield S. a confirmed paid ticketed preference flag, window elite tier. 2 confirmed seats, 2 different assignments. One simple fact. Denise hesitated. Boarding was already 10 minutes behind. The line at the door hadn't stopped. Behind her, Patris was watching from the galley, arms folded, waiting to see if this would resolve itself without her. "Sir," Denise said, turning to Julian, "would you be willing to be flexible today? We could move you to 4C, same cabin, same service, and it would really help us keep boarding on schedule." Julian didn't answer right away. He looked at the tablet, not at her. At the tablet, "Can I ask you something first?" he said, "before we talk about moving anyone. Of course, please enter the reason." Denise blinked. "I'm sorry." "Whatever you're about to type into that system," Julian said, "to explain why I'm being asked to leave my assigned seat, please enter the actual reason. Not a summary. The real one." The words weren't loud. They weren't even particularly forceful. But they landed differently than anything said so far, because they weren't a request for comfort. They were a request for a record. Patris arrived a moment later, drawn by the pause more than by anything dramatic. She had the calm, slightly impatient energy of someone whose job was to make problems disappear before they became visible to the rest of the cabin. "What's going on?" she asked Denise quietly. "Seat conflict, 3A and 4C, Denise said. "I was just explaining the options." "He's not being reasonable," the woman in 3A said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear now. "I told him I always sit in the window. This happens every time I fly." Julian said nothing to her directly. He kept his attention on Denise, and then on Patris, because they were the ones holding the tablet, and the tablet was the only thing that mattered. "I'm not being unreasonable," Julian said. "I paid for 3A. I'm asking to sit in the seat I paid for. That's the entire request." "We understand," Patris said, in the tone reserved for calming children and difficult passengers, a tone that assumes correctness on one side and moderation on the other. "We just want to avoid delaying the flight. If you could work with us here." "I am working with you," Julian said. "I'm asking you to check the record and seat the passengers according to what they paid for. That's not resistance. That's the policy." A few rows back, a man in 2D, an older passenger in a soft gray sweater, reading glasses pushed up into thinning hair, lowered his newspaper slightly. He had been listening since the moment voices rose above a murmur, the way anyone in a shared space eventually starts listening when tension enters the room even quietly. He said nothing yet. He simply watched. Denise's fingers moved over the tablet screen. Julian noticed the motion, not because he was staring, but because his eyes were trained to catch small inconsistencies. A habit built over years of reviewing contracts, invoices, and reports where a single line, entered carelessly, could shift the meaning of an entire agreement. "What are you entering?" he asked. "Just documenting the situation," Denise said, not looking up. "Can you read it to me?" She hesitated. It's just an internal note. I understand it's internal, Julian said. I'm still asking what it says. Patris stepped in smoothly. Sir, we don't usually share internal cabin notes with passengers. It's just standard documentation. Then I'll ask differently, Julian said. Does the note say that I refused a reasonable accommodation? Denise's silence answered before she did. It's just a placeholder, she said. We can adjust it. Please don't adjust it, Julian said. Please correct it. There's a difference. By now, boarding had slowed to a visible crawl. The line at the door hadn't moved in almost 90 seconds. A gate agent's voice crackled faintly through the intercom outside, asking economy passengers to continue boarding through the rear entrance while the situation up front resolved. We need cooperation here, Patris said, lowering her voice as if intimacy might succeed where policy hadn't. Same cabin, same service. We are just trying to avoid a delay that affects everyone on this flight, not just the people in these 2 rows. I understand the pressure of a delay, Julian said. I'm not causing it. The delay exists because a seat was occupied by someone it wasn't assigned to, and instead of correcting that, I'm being asked to absorb the inconvenience. You're refusing a reasonable adjustment, Patris said, and for the first time, a thin edge of impatience crept into her otherwise composed voice. I'm refusing an adjustment that isn't reasonable, Julian said. There's a difference, and I think if we're being honest, you know there's a difference. The woman in 3A crossed her arms. This is honestly embarrassing, she said. I fly this route every week. I've never had someone make an issue out of a seat before. I'm not making an issue out of a seat, Julian said, still calm, still even. I'm asking that the system reflect what actually happened. And what actually happened, Patris said. An edge of frustration finally breaking through her professional tone, is that we have a passenger who paid for 4C insisting on 3A because of a preference flag, and a passenger in 3A who won't simply move 1 row back to keep the flight on schedule. That's not what happened, Julian said. What happened is she is sitting in a seat that isn't hers, and I am being asked to accept the inconvenience of that instead of her. He turned the boarding pass slightly again, this time toward Patris. Did I release my paid seat? He asked. At any point since I boarded did I tell anyone I was willing to give up 3A? Patris didn't answer immediately. Is a preference stronger than a paid assignment? Julian continued. Because if it is, I'd like that explained to me clearly so I understand the policy instead of guessing at it. It's not that a preference is stronger, Denise said carefully. It's just that sometimes we ask for cooperation to keep things moving. I understand asking, Julian said. I don't understand documenting it as something it isn't. Please attach my boarding confirmation to whatever note you're building. If the record shows I refused something, it should also show what I was refusing and why. From 2 rows back, the man in 2D finally spoke, folding his newspaper fully closed. For what it's worth, he said, in an unhurried voice that nonetheless carried, I've been sitting here the whole time. He hasn't raised his voice. He hasn't blocked anyone. He asked for the seat he paid for. That's all I've heard. Patris glanced at him, then back at Julian, the polished calm in her expression tightening slightly at the edges. We appreciate everyone's patience, she said to the cabin at large now, the way people speak when they are trying to close a conversation rather than continue it. We're going to get this sorted quickly. I'd like to see the seat displacement policy, Julian said, not summarized. The actual policy. If there's a process for moving a paid passenger without their consent, I want to understand it. If there isn't, I'd like the record to say that too. Near the galley, a trainee flight attendant named Marcus stood slightly apart from the unfolding scene, holding a stack of folded blankets he had been distributing before the conflict began. He was new, 3 weeks into flying, still learning where things were kept, still watching senior crew members the way an apprentice watches a craftsman, absorbing rhythm more than rules. He had seen the tablet screen over Denise's shoulder when she typed the first note. Courtesy swap pending passenger cooperation requested. Then moments later a second note had appeared, added quickly, almost defensively. Aisle obstruction, boarding delay. Marcus knew, even with 3 weeks of experience, that neither note was true. Julian hadn't obstructed the aisle. He had stood beside his row, boarding pass in hand, speaking quietly. The delay wasn't caused by him standing there. It was caused by the seat not matching the ticket. Marcus said nothing. He was new. He didn't know if speaking up was allowed, or if it would end his probationary period before it truly began. He busied himself refolding a blanket that didn't need refolding, eyes flicking toward the tablet every few seconds, throat tight with the particular discomfort of watching something small and untrue take shape in front of him. During training, an instructor had told his class that the tablet was the most important object on the aircraft, more important than the safety demonstration, more important than the drink cart. Whatever you type in there, she had said, becomes what happened, not what actually happened, what you typed. At the time it had sounded like a minor procedural note, one line among hundreds in a 3-week course. Standing here now, watching a false phrase settle onto a screen like it belonged there, Marcus understood for the first time what she had actually meant. He thought about saying something. He rehearsed a sentence in his head, "That's not quite what happened," turning it over, testing how it would sound out loud, and each time he imagined saying it, he imagined Petrus's expression hardening, imagined a note in his own file instead of Denise's. So he said nothing, not yet, and told himself that watching carefully was its own kind of readiness, even if it didn't feel like enough. Petrus picked up the handset near the bulkhead and pressed a button connecting the cabin phone to the gate operations line. Her voice shifted into the clipped, efficient register crews use when speaking to people they can't see. "This is first class. We have a seat conflict, 3A and 4C, requesting guidance on proceeding with a courtesy adjustment." There was a pause. Then a voice came through, tinny but clear enough for those standing nearby to hear fragments. "Copy that. Can you provide the displacement reason code for the paid seat change?" Petrus glanced at Denise. Denise glanced at the tablet. "We're documenting it as a courtesy swap," Petrus said into the phone. "Understood, but I need the displacement code to authorize moving a confirmed paid seat," the voice replied. "Systems flagging a warning here, passenger release required before any paid seat reassignment. Do you have passenger consent on file?" Silence. "Negative," Petrus finally said. "Not yet." "Then I can't authorize the change from this end," the voice said. "You'll need a release from the passenger currently in 3A or a valid operational reason. Preference flags alone don't override a paid assignment." "That's not something I can code around." Petrus set the handset down slower than she'd picked it up. Julian hadn't moved. He hadn't smiled either. This wasn't a moment of triumph for him, just confirmation of something he had already suspected. He simply said quietly, "Then I think we know what the record should say." Word must have traveled fast, because within a few minutes, a woman in a dark blazer with an airline ID badge clipped at her hip walked briskly down the jet bridge and onto the aircraft, folder tucked under one arm. She introduced herself simply as the station operations manager, a woman named Renata Cole, and her presence changed the temperature of the cabin instantly, not through volume, but through the particular stillness that settles when someone with actual authority enters a room full of people pretending to have it. "I need to see the galley tablet," she said to Petrus, "and the passenger release log if one exists for this seat change." "We were still finalizing the documentation," Petrus said. "Then finalize it now in front of me," Renata said, not unkindly but without patience for delay either. She reviewed the screen herself, scrolling slowly, her expression unreadable. Denise stood beside her, hands folded, saying nothing. "Seat 3A," Renata read aloud. "Reid J. paid, confirmed, ticketed, no release on file." She scrolled further. "Seat 4C Whitfield S. paid, confirmed, ticketed. Preference flag, window." "Preference flag is not a seat guarantee. It never has been." She looked up. "Whose note is this?" she asked, tapping the screen. "Aisle obstruction, boarding delay." Denise's mouth opened then closed. "I entered that," she admitted. "I was trying to keep the log moving while we sorted things out." "Was there an obstruction?" Renata asked. "No," Denise said quietly. "Was there a delay caused by this passenger?" Renata continued, nodding toward Julian without looking at him directly yet. "The delay was caused by the seat conflict," Denise said, "not by him specifically." "Then the note is false," Renata said simply. "Not exaggerated, not softened, false. It needs to come out." She scrolled again, more slowly this time, reading the timestamps beside each entry. This first note went in at 7:41, she said. Courtesy swap pending. That was entered before you ever asked him to move or after. Denise hesitated. Before, she admitted. I typed it while I was still talking to him. I thought it would resolve itself. So the record existed before the conversation it was supposed to describe, Renata said, not as a question. She closed her eyes briefly, the particular fatigue of someone who has seen this pattern before settling into her shoulders. That's the part that concerns me most, not that a mistake happened. Mistakes happen constantly in this job. It's that the documentation was written to create the outcome instead of recording it. She looked toward Patris. Did you review this note before it went in? I saw it, Patris said. I didn't stop it. That's the same thing for our purposes, Renata said. Marcus, still standing near the galley with his blankets, felt something loosen in his chest. He hadn't spoken yet, but someone finally had, and it was easier to breathe. Renata turned to Julian for the first time. Mr. Reid, she said. I want to understand this correctly in your own words briefly. What happened when you arrived at your seat? Another passenger was sitting in it, Julian said. I showed my boarding pass. I asked her to move. She declined, citing a preference. The crew asked me to move instead. I asked them to enter the reason before I agreed to anything. Did you raise your voice at any point? Renata asked. No. Did you block the aisle? No, I stood beside my row. Did you refuse a reasonable accommodation, as one of the notes suggests? I refused to accept a false accommodation, Julian said. There's a difference between being asked and being repositioned around someone else's comfort without a policy basis. Renata nodded slowly, the way people nod when a story lines up cleanly with the evidence in front of them. She turned toward the man in 2D. Sir, did you witness this exchange? I did, he said. Start to finish. He never raised his voice. He never blocked anyone. He asked for the seat he paid for, and he kept asking for the paperwork to be honest about it. That's the whole story. Renata closed the folder briefly, then opened it again to a blank incident sheet. Trainee, she said, glancing toward Marcus not unkindly, did you observe the note being entered? Marcus swallowed. This was the moment his 3 weeks of training hadn't prepared him for the choice between staying invisible and saying something true. Yes, he said. I saw the first note about the courtesy swap, and then the second one about the obstruction. Neither one matched what I saw. He wasn't blocking anything. He was just standing there calm, asking questions. P21, his voice shook slightly on the last few words, but it didn't break. Renata wrote something down. Thank you, she said. That took more courage than it should have needed to. The cabin phone rang again, this time not from gate operations, but rooted from the airline's corporate accounts desk. A line rarely used during boarding, reserved for situations involving contract account holders rather than individual travelers. Patris answered, visibly unsettled now, and after a brief exchange held the receiver out toward Renata. It's corporate, she said, asking for you specifically. Renata took the phone. The conversation was short, mostly listening on her end, punctuated by a few clipped acknowledgments. When she hung up, her expression had shifted slightly, not surprised exactly, but recalibrated. Mr. Reid, she said, I've just been informed that you're the authorized signer on your company's corporate travel agreement with this airline. Julian didn't react with pride or vindication. If anything, his expression stayed exactly the same, attentive, patient, unbothered by the reveal. That's correct, he said simply. That agreement includes a paid seat integrity clause, Renata continued. Any denial of a confirmed premium assignment involving your account has to be documented accurately before departure, or it becomes a contract compliance issue, not just a customer service one. I wasn't trying to invoke that, Julian said. I didn't mention it. I would have asked the same questions if I were flying on a personal ticket in economy. The record should be accurate regardless of who's sitting in the seat. I believe that, Renata said, and she seemed to mean it. For what it's worth, nothing about how you handled this suggested someone leaning on a contract. You never mentioned your company. You never asked for a manager by name. You just kept asking for the reason over and over until someone had to give you an honest one. That would have worked whether or not the contract existed. It just means the contract now backs up what should have been true regardless. That's the part that matters to me, Julian said. Not the clause, the accuracy. I understand, Renata said. But it does mean this isn't just a seating dispute anymore. It's a documentation failure with contract implications, which makes correcting it now non-negotiable, not just courteous. She turned back to the tablet. We're going to fix this properly, she said. Not quickly, properly. The correction took longer than the conflict itself, in the way that undoing something false always takes longer than telling it in the first place. Renata had Denise read the original notes aloud, word for word, so there could be no ambiguity about what needed to be struck. Then she guided the entry herself, typing carefully, narrating each phrase as she wrote it. Assigned paid passenger, seat 3A, was denied access to confirmed seat after unassigned passenger occupied it without release, she said, speaking as she typed. Voluntary swap was proposed and logged before passenger consent was obtained. No valid displacement code existed. Correction entered by station operations following passenger request for accurate documentation. She looked up at Julian. Is that accurate to what happened? She asked. Yes, he said. That's accurate. Then close the record correctly, he added, echoing the words he'd used earlier, this time not as a demand but as confirmation that it was finally being done. The woman in 4C, Miss Whitfield, had gone quiet somewhere in the last several minutes, the earlier confidence in her posture folding inward as the conversation moved further from her preferences and further into policy language she couldn't argue with. She unbuckled slowly when Renata asked her without drama to return to her assigned seat. This is humiliating, she murmured, gathering her pillow and tablet. The correction is not humiliation, Renata said, not sharply but firmly. It is the accurate record, nothing more. Ms. Whitfield didn't respond. She moved back to 4C in silence, and for the first time since boarding began, the cabin around her seemed to exhale. Renata wasn't finished. Denise, she said, your seat displacement access is suspended pending review. Not as a punishment yet, as a precaution, until we understand how these notes were entered and why. Denise nodded, pale, saying nothing in her own defense, because there was nothing accurate left to say. Patris, Renata continued, your closeout authorization is disabled until station review clears this flight's documentation. I know that affects your evaluation. I'm sorry for that, but the process exists for exactly this kind of situation. Patris's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Arguing would have meant defending notes that had already been proven false in front of a corporate call and a station manager. Ms. Whitfield's preference override will also be suspended pending review, Renata added, loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, though not unkindly. A preference flag is a request, not an entitlement. It shouldn't have been treated as one today. She closed the folder. And this isn't the only flight, she said, almost to herself now. We're pulling every voluntary seat swap logged this quarter for audit. If any other paid passenger was quietly marked as a voluntary courtesy change when they weren't, that record gets corrected, and their compensation gets reviewed. Marcus, still standing near the galley, felt the weight of what he'd said settle differently now. Not as a risk that might cost him his position, but as a small, necessary thread in something larger than one seat dispute. By the time the correction was fully logged, boarding had resumed around them, economy passengers filing past with the particular obliviousness of people who have no idea that anything happened at all. The cabin lights seemed, if anything, a little warmer now, though nothing about them had physically changed. Julian finally sat down in 3. Marcus approached a few minutes later, holding a glass of water, offering it with careful hands, as if the water itself needed to make up for everything that had almost gone wrong. Thank you, Julian said, taking it. And thank you for saying what you saw. That mattered. Marcus nodded, unable to find words equal to how much lighter he suddenly felt. Renata appeared once more before the doors closed, this time simply to confirm. Is the correction attached to the file? Julian asked her. She opened the folder and turned it toward him, a printed correction sheet, already clipped into the flight's paperwork, signed, time-stamped, accurate. Attached, she said, before departure, exactly as it should be. Julian looked at it for a moment, then nodded once and handed it back. He didn't smile in triumph. He simply looked, for the first time since boarding began, like a man whose only real request had finally been honored. not because anyone had done him a favor, but because the record now matched the truth. The aircraft door closed a few minutes later than scheduled. Nobody outside that cabin would ever know why. To every other passenger boarding through the rear, it was just an ordinary flight, a little delayed, nothing more. But inside first class, something quieter and more permanent had happened. A false note had been written, and instead of being accepted the way false notes so often are, smoothed over, forgotten, buried under the next departure, it had been pulled apart, sentence by sentence, until only the truth was left standing. The lie did not fall apart because Julian Reid raised his voice. It fell apart because he asked them to write down the reason. Would you have stayed calm long enough for the record to correct itself, or would you have spoken up the moment the false note appeared? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes.